Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Today I wanted to talk about something that I think is kind of near and dear to my heart, but it kind of burns at the same time. You know, I mentioned on the podcast several times, the audio podcast, thank you all for listening, that those of you that keep supporting me. It gives me great motivation to do that. Check out my Rumble channel, which is 505BROU. I just uploaded a video tonight that covers something we've covered on the audio podcast already, which is the DHS terms. But something that that has kind of bothered me today, and I saw it earlier today. This comes from Iraq veteran 8888. Everyone I'm seeing on social media, especially on Facebook, my friends, they're all espousing how great Jason Aldean is. And I've said this too about Try This in a Small Town, the song that came out, and I support it because he's right. If you tried some of those things that they try in those, like in Ferguson, they would be dealt with summarily in small towns very decisively and not necessarily in a great way. But it's come to light from the past, and this is typical when you think about what happens with Hollywood. Conservatives, which I'm a former member of, now I'm more, you guys all know I'm more of an ANCAP. When you're a conservative, it's hard to find people in Hollywood or in the media circles that are in your group. And Jason Aldean probably is not the one you want to back. And the reason why I say this is because Jason Aldean has come out years ago, it turns out, as an anti-gun person. He has said outright on Twitter, and it's still on his Twitter if you want to go find it, where he says it's too easy to get a firearm. Now, that is something that I have a big problem with, because I have purchased, firearms multiple times. I collect. I'm an avid shooter, and I know what you have to do to get a firearm. It is nowhere near as easy to go to get a firearm than it is to do anything else. In fact, I would say it's more odious and more of a pain in the butt to do than it needs to be. It's not how our founding fathers actually intended it to be. And what you're seeing now is people on the right have a tendency to gather around so-called allies. And then you find out later that these guys probably aren't your friends. And that's what we need to talk about, is that time and time again, we see new people come out, and we're hopeful that they're on our side, just to find out later that they're not. And right now, that is a big concern for me, because we're winning in the culture war. My friends that are posting this have called this the silent majority speaking, just like the Bud Light commercial, the Bud Light debacle, where they've lost $29 million and have become, or not million, $1 billion, and have lost their throne as one of the king of beers still in the United States. They lost to a Mexican beer, Modelo. So why has that happened? It's because anytime that conservatives actually get together, or libertarians, or anyone that gets together and does a boycott, or actually puts their money where their mouth is and backs the causes and backs the organization, backs the company that they believe in based off of their ideals, you see mountains move. And that happened very clearly with the Bud Light stuff. And Jason Aldean made #1 on iTunes because of the conservative audience that he has. Now, if you look at country music, the story behind Jason Aldean's song is that Country Music Television refused to carry the video because it had a courthouse that is infamous for an incident back in the day where there was a lynching there. So leftists latched onto that and said this is pro-racism and it's pro-lynching when it had nothing to do with that. And that's where conservatives latched on this and said, yeah, we support this. With that support, you need to be very careful who you support, because I was one of those guys that was very much on Jason Aldean's side, and I still am about the lyrics of his song. However, I will not support him financially because of what I've told you already. that he has come out and said it's too easy to get firearms. I am a single issue voter, and it comes down to my rights and freedoms, and specifically the 2A. And he's landed on the wrong side of that for me to support. But that doesn't mean the rest of you can't. I'm just trying to put this information out so you understand what is going on in our world. We have time and time again been screwed by not just Hollywood and music people, but by our own politicians. That they espouse one thing, they say what we want them to say, or what we hope they're going to say, just for them to get into power and reverse themselves and end up screwing us. Trump's a prime example of that. He opened the door to backdoor gun control that Biden is now heavily using. With that, I have to give you a little bit of a white pill today. We are winning still. That Vanderstock v. Garland case that I was telling you about the the receiver rule that had been vacated and then stayed so that they could let the Fifth Circuit Court rule and see if this was actually going to stick. Well, the Fifth Circuit case came out today, and the ruling stayed, so the case is vacated. That means that the 80% receivers and anyone that wants to make a firearm for their own personal use, which has been legal since 1776, is still capable of doing that or legally able to do so. That ghost guns are not as big of a problem, and they couldn't prove it in court, that this was a big enough thing to actually have the case stand and hold its ground. So this is a win for us in the 2A. And when we go forward, we need to look at those cool things that we're winning at. The culture war it's tiring. You see so many times the stupid that comes out. This whole trans agenda, this whole woke agenda that we're all overly tired of and we're all overly just basically over. It keeps coming up time and time again. And you hear these screeching harpies from the left that come out and they're instantly offended at something, whatever it is. And we look at it and go, why are you offended about this? This is about American, as about American identity or patriotism as it can be. And it seems like one side is always against that. Well, here's our chance to actually say we've taken some wins. We've won very heavily. And it goes back to what I've always said. Put your money where your mouth is and back organizations and businesses that actually don't hate you. It was very easy to sidestep Bud Light. One, it was crap beer. Number two is there are tons of options that you can change up and go try something different and affect change instantly. The same thing with the country music. Jason Aldean came out with this song. Screeching Leftist came out and said, oh, look, and CMT banned it. And everyone banded behind him and made it a number one hit. But in that, remember where our allies are. When people like this come out and they don't espouse or express our values 100%, that's okay. No one can do that. But on single issues that matter to you, you need to be very careful of. And that's where I have to pull a little bit more support back from Jason Aldean. I agree with the lyrics of his song. I don't see the problem that leftists have said about, the courthouse, mostly because what I saw was that was like a millisecond in the background. The rest of the time they were showing news footage from all the news outlets that showed the riots and the disparity that happens in larger cities versus what happens in a small city. There were peaceful protests in my hometown against COVID. There were peaceful protests for Black Lives Matter, believe it or not, in northwest New Mexico. It caused some controversy, but it was definitely peaceful. And none of that stuff, what happened that we saw in the music video for Try This in a Small Town, what happened in my town. And I'm firmly convinced of that, is if we saw an idiot with a Molotov cocktail running towards a building, he's going to get dealt with physically one way or another. And that's what I think Jason Aldean was talking about or speaking to. And we need to be more of that mindset as the world seems to be on fire. And we need to realize that our community is what keeps us safe, keeps us sane, and keeps us away from that nuts stuff that's happening in larger blue cities. And we have to work very hard consistently to make sure that that stuff doesn't come home to roost in our small towns, because you can't do that stuff in our small town. You know, you can talk about all the stuff that's happened in small towns. There's good and bad that have happened. But I can tell you, in general, having lived in a small town for a long time, you're more likely to have people rally around you and support you than you have come out against you, unless they actually believe you're an idiot. And that's what I think that song was about. So I went on long enough about Jason Aldean and watching your allies. Like, share, subscribe, be great.
In the top, I can't let it slide. My politics are rather controversial. Who would have thought that I ain't catching all slack and I have enemies